Hello, everyone. My name is Wang. I'm the founding partner of Outpost Capital. So today we are going to talk about everything you need to know about virtual reality in China. Well, actually, this title is very misleading because obviously there are a lot of things about VR going on in China, and there's no way I can cover everything in just 20 minutes. But I do want to take this opportunity to give you a good overview about what's happening in China, who are the players, as well as some of the potential opportunities that's happening out there. So let's get started. A little bit about myself. I've been looking to VR companies and making investment in the past almost 3 years. And a year ago, I started Outpost Capital. So we are the first VR focused fund that is based in the Bay Area with a strong tie to China. And it's a small fund. It's $20 million, and we make early stage investment, focus on seed stage investment, and our regular check size range between 100K to 500K dollars. And we have so far we have 6 portfolio companies. We've listed 5 of them here. There's one company we are working to close these days, so we haven't make the announcement. And one of the company, weve, will be the next session where Ryan from weve is gonna give us a good session for the light field technologies. So let's dive in what's going on in China. Let's take a look at a little bit history first. So the VR buzz start in China roughly around Q3 2015. And what I'm listing here is what I call as a non-official roadmap of VR in China. So basically, what's happening here is I find that the VR companies and VR revolutions in China is actually happening in some kind of patterns. So for example, in Q3 2015, the starting point of VR buzz in China, there are a number of companies from Shenzhen that's manufacturing cardboard-like products and ship it worldwide, right? And when we come to Q4 2015, there are a lot of VR headset makers, the high-end headset makers. They are trying to understand what's happening with the Oculus DK1 and DK2, and they are trying to ship a similar product. And in the Q1 and Q2 2016 in China, VR video, the 360 video, have become extremely hot in China and has been the hottest sector for the startups and for the public companies to make investment in. And in Q3 and Q4, so in Q3, it have a lot of companies are working on some kind of VR content, and in Q4, there are a lot of companies switching from the content creation space into VR B2B solution space. So basically here, what I want to talk about is that today, we are looking into a fully booming VR ecosystem in China. And here I'm very glad to announce that the release of the first ever China VR landscape. So this landscape is presented to you by Outpost Capital together with one of our trusted partner in China. It's called Heixia. So they are one of the leading VR media in China. So note that in this landscape, this does not represent all the companies in VR AR space in China. This is only part of the company where we selected, where we think that these companies are the leader in this space and have offered very high quality products and service in that category. So again, it's not only about the quantity, it's more about the quality. Actually, if you look at the chart on the top left, we see everybody knows HTC Vive, and we see Pimax, which has the world's first 8K VR headset, and companies like in the upper left, we see Huawei and Xiaomi is working on some mobile VR headset. And Doc Dai from Noitem, who just did the presentation, is actually falls into the input. So he's working on motion capturing and and large space multi-users type of technology solution. So yeah, so actually a lot of companies are here today as well. So I encourage you to check them out, understand, try their product, and if you were here last year to try their product and try to compare the difference, and I'm sure you'll be surprised how far they have been achieved from where they used to be. So here I like to point out one category in this chart. And before I point it out, I want to show you a picture. Basically, you know that a lot of people has been talking about business model innovation in China. And we used to talk a lot about how Chinese companies are copying the business model here in the US. But recently, we talk more and more about copy to the US instead of copy to China. So I always very interested in to learn about new business model innovation in China. So during my last trip to China, I actually visited 20 plus cities. And when I'm digging down to some of the business models, that means you can't always stay in tier 1 cities. Sometimes you need to go to tier 2, tier 4 city, tier 3 cities, or even some rural areas to really understand what is the situation, who are the customers, and what they do, right? So this is one of the picture I take during one of those trips. Anyone want to take a guess what's going on? Yep. So here's the answer. That's actually what they are doing inside. So it's a mobile VR arcade. And there's this company, they put the whole VR arcade solution in trucks, and they drive these trucks to the rural areas in China. And they offer to the villagers in these rural areas who have never heard about VR, who have never tried their VR experiences. They charge them 50 RMB to 100 RMB so that they can have their once in a lifetime VR experience. This type of experience to us it sucks, right? But to them it's awesome. And if you look at the face after they try it, they are all getting so excited, and to them it totally pays off the price, although it's not a cheap price for them. And a lot of people, when I showed them this picture, they told me, "Hey Ryan, you are a VC, and you know that this type of business model is not very sustainable." But the reality is, if you ask this question, that means you are underestimating the population in China. So basically, the vertical that I want to point out is a VR arcade market in China. And Dr. Dai has already given us some pretty good overview about what is going on. And at this point today, there are over 10,000 VR arcades in China. And it falls into 3 different categories. There are smaller ones, which is a picture on top. There are medium size, which is a picture in the middle. And there are larger type of VR arcade experiences, and some of them are actually powered by Project Alice, which was just presented by Dr. Dai. One of the a little bit counterintuitive facts here is 60% of the customers are actually female customers. And over 70% arcades are operating at a loss at this point. I think this conclusion is similar to the bad news where Dr. Dai has just mentioned in his slides. And the worst thing, I think, is no industry standard have been established. So a lot of content that they are operating with this type of VR arcade actually they are operating that type of content illegally, but there's no way you can avoid it. But the situation is not good at this point, but I think at the same time, this is where one of the biggest opportunity in VR AR space in China. Here's why. So the number one, the consumer mindset of the VR arcade consumer at this point is more of a curiosity-driven type of mindset. So they've never tried VR headset. they are curious about what it feels like. So actually, what they are paying is to paying their first VR experience, to be able to sit in a chair and put the headset on and feel what it feels like, right? But we are in a stage where we are evolving from the first generation to the second generation, where for the consumers, they are more of content driven than curiosity driven. That means if we use the analogy of going to a movie theater, right? So in the first generation, you go to a movie theater because you've never watched a movie before and you want to feel like, hey, I want to feel what it feels like to watch a movie. But right now, some of the consumers have started to think about, hey, I want to try that content. I want to try that experience. And that is the motivation they are coming back to the VR arcades. So I think the consumer mindset is shifting at this point to a more content-driven type of mindset. And that's going to keep driving the sustainability if we can inject some high-quality content into this market. And right now in the market, there's a strong need of social multiplayer co-op or esports type of VR contents. And there's basically no winning content at this point, but I think very soon we will see a lot of repeatable multiplayer type of content that can be very successful in VR arcade in China. And also the leaders in this sector are working very actually working together at this point to try to set up the industry standard. And for us, we are actually working with a few of the top companies in VR arcade space to talk about how we might be able to help set up a dedicated distribution channel to import some high quality foreign content and to distribute them to the VR arcade in China. So that's why I think it's still a great opportunity, although from the data, it doesn't look very good. And I think the bottom line for this category is right now, the biggest challenge for the industry, I think, is not that we don't have enough installation base. So right now we have 5 million plus headsets out there. I think that's not a big number, but at the same time, that's not a small number. The biggest problem at this point is that there's no real VR users. For example, for me, I have all the toys at home, I have all the headsets at home, but I don't spend a lot of time in VR every day, right? And I think, if by the end of this year, there could be a group of people who actually spending 2 hours, 3 hours in VR every day. And these type of people will be the true VR users, will be the real VR users. And that's gonna give a lot of hope to the industry as well. So I think, the first critical adapters for virtual reality, most likely in China, is gonna come from the VR arcades. And there are a lot more things I want to talk about VR in China. But the reality is we have limited time. So here I'd like to share how we at Outpost are looking into the problem and what is our approach to the market. So to us, to get started, I'd like to make a statement in that China, we all know that at the end of the day, China will be the biggest market. But I think at this point, only a few people are aware of is that right now, VR is actually being adopted faster in China. And most likely, the mass consumer adoption of VR is gonna happen faster in China than the US. And it's actually pretty difficult to explain why it is, because to really understand, in order to really fully understand this, you need to have a pretty good understanding about the social structure, about the culture, and people's mentality out there. Over the years, I actually have a full thesis on the reasons and how to answer this question. But if I have to pick a few of the most important reasons, I think there are 3 elements. So number one, when we look at who's driving the ecosystem, right? And this can echo back to the to Tim's point, where he shows a pyramid he shows a pyramid chart. So when we look at who's sitting on top of the pyramid, China versus the US. In the US, it's Facebook, Google, Apple, all the big tech companies, right? But in China, we not only have Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, Huawei, Xiaomi, these kind of leading tech companies. The more important driver here is that China is a government-led society, and right now the Chinese government is pushing virtual reality, and they are trying to push the adoption of this technology and to stimulate the ecosystem so that it's gonna happen faster. And secondly, if we look at the equation from the consumer side, so the consumers in the US have a different mindset compared to the consumers in China. Where in the US, people's mindset is if a new technology is now 10 times better, it's now super easy to use, it's not very affordable, they will not adopt it. They will say, hey, let's wait until it's good enough. But in China, people are kind of not happy with what they have today. So they have a more adaptive mindset. If something is slightly better, most likely they are willing to try it and they are willing to use it. So there's a huge difference between the consumer's mindset. And also the social infrastructure for VR is different, right? So VR arcade is something I already talked about. And also we know that China is the biggest manufacturing country. And on the mobile market, China is a purely mobile first market. And it's the biggest mobile market. So if you believe that the mass consumer market of VR, the mass consumer adoption of VR is going to happen with the mobile VR, China will definitely have a unique advantage in that case. So that being said, I think to us, it's pretty clear to us that the US is driving the technology in VR AR space, but in terms of the consumer adoption, China is leading the consumer adoption in this equation. And I think, if we look at the past ecosystem on how PC, internet, or mobile has been adopted, it's always the US have established their own ecosystem, and then China start to catching up. But I think for VR AR industry, the situation will be different. It's going to be a globalized adoption of VR and AR, and it's going to be the ecosystem is going to be global. So again, US will be driving the technology, and China will be driving the adoption. And actually, the speed of the circle here is going to be depends on how much capital is injected into this sector. So what we've already done at Outpost. And what we've already learned is that we think that for VR AR companies and startups, it doesn't make sense when you just go out there and talk about product market fit. It doesn't make sense when you talk about go-to-market strategy, because the VR market at this point is so small that it's kind of meaningless to talk about. What's more important is to understand which market is going to happen faster and which market is going to be bigger. So in the traditional startup financing model in the US, we know that it's super hard for any startup to break into a foreign market before they are big enough, before they are Series D, Series E type of company, right? So that they have enough resource bandwidth to think about what's going on in the foreign market. But the new model that we have introduced with Outpost is that we think that VR AR companies, it is critical for VR AR companies to build an early presence in China to have the awareness of what's going on. We are not saying that, hey, you need to develop your business on day one, but at least you have to understand what's going on. You have to understand who are the players, and you need to be sensitive and be aware, have the awareness of the opportunity. And if some kind of opportunity pops up, you have what it takes to connect the dots. So that's what we're doing in the past year. And while we are enjoying what we have achieved, I think right now the industry is facing a bigger challenge which is for us, what we do is we can only help our portfolio companies, right? So there are limited things we can do. And I think in order to really achieve what's happening in this diagram, what we really want to have is something like this, something that can really bring the China VR community and the US VR community together. So, so I've been spending some time thinking about this, and I like to leave this as an open question to you guys. So if you have any idea how we can achieve this or how we can contribute to this, I'm happy to talk to any one of you. So to sum up, I've talked about the VR industry landscape in China, and it's gonna be available tomorrow on our website. So if you want to download the version, you can just go to our website, outpostvc.com. And we've talked about the opportunities in VR arcade. I think it's one of the early opportunity for VR in China. And China will be leading the mass consumer adoption of VR. Is the fundamental of our investment thesis, and I think the what's going on with the industry at this point is there will be this formation of a global VR ecosystem. So that's it. Any questions? Yes.
Okay, so you talk about the opportunity in the arcade is not
Right.
that promising in China, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you see the other top use cases maybe more promising in China?
Some of the are you talking about the consumer side or more on the
I mean, either, yeah, enterprise or
so
consumer.
basically another thing I want to talk about is VR education, right? And VR education, to put it simply, there are many differences in the education system in the US versus China. In the US, it's more distributed, but in China, it's more centralized. And it's actually part of the government system, right? So in the center of the system, it's a government, right? So it's always easier for any new technology to penetrate into a centralized system rather than a distributed system. So that's one thing. The other thing is, obviously we know that there are more Chinese students in China than anywhere else in the world. But another reality is the Chinese people care a lot, the Chinese parents care a lot about their kids' education, and they are willing to spend money in it. So there, I remember I read of one analysis saying that on average, a Chinese household is spending 20% of their household income in their kids' education, versus in the US, that number is less than 5%. So definitely, it's not only a big market, but it's gonna drive the adoption very quickly. And I think actually it is very likely that the mass market adoption of VR is gonna happen with the VR education market in China. Because for the parents, they have a fear of missing out type of mentality, right? If they say that, hey, my kid's friend, they all have VR headset in their home, but my kids don't have VR headset in my home, so I've got to buy it. No matter whether it's effective or not, I can't let my kids to lose at the beginning. So I think there's a great way to kind of introduce VR headsets to the families in China as well. Yes. Not too much going on at this point. There are definitely a number of using VR to treat some kind of psychological related issues, that type of use case. But at this point, I think compared to the US, where people are actually trying to adopt virtual reality into the surgeons, into the training, into the even into the OR room, I think China is still a little bit lacking on the VR healthcare space.
Where would you say would you see is the largest movement in VR making?
Oh, what's your question?
What's the largest? Sorry, let's go. Sorry. So my follow-up question was, what area in the healthcare space would you see the most momentum happening within the VR usage?
In VR, in China specific or in general?
In China.
In China, I think it's using VR to treat some psychological related issue, especially in using VR to treat some the loneliness and the type of for older generations, right? Because the current society in China is that it's the average age is getting older and older because of the one-child policy, and for most of the parents, they only have one child, and most of the time their child is not around them. It's not around them, right? So they all feel pretty lonely at this point, and I think VR can be a good solution to solve that problem. Yes, last question.
I'm sorry, we have to set up for the next session.
Oh, okay.
If we could take any further questions outside.
All right, sure. Thank you.